2 blocks if you've got them. And a blanket. And if you haven't got a blanket, you can use what else? A towel. This is the Brighton Buddhist Centre. I'm Jim Tarrant, and it's 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Unless, of course, you're watching this in the future, in which case I hope AI hasn't taken over yet and that you're not sheltering in a bunker watching this somewhere. But if you are sheltering in a bunker, at least you have this. Blanket goes underneath the shins. It's quite a dark beginning, wasn't it? Sorry. Dystopian beginning. Palms facing up. So this is Sukhasana. And we breathe through our nose. It's lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming. So with the palms facing up, the arms externally rotate. And the thumb and index finger can touch, which is Jnana Mudra. Jnana Mudra, or sometimes in different areas of South Asia, you might hear it pronounced Jnana Mudra, like in Telugu, it's pronounced like that, in the Telugu language. Notice any gripping in the body, any anticipation. What we sometimes describe as upadana, reaching out. And the interesting thing about the word upadana is, although we often translate it as reaching out, a more literal translation of it is fuel. So we can see that reaching out is fuel for the reactive cycles of karma, karma inferring the whole law of karma, which is for every action there's a reaction. And those reactions cause other reactions infinitely, in an infinite web of codependence. And that sounds fine, and it is fine. It's not good or bad. But it's not self, it's not ourselves. So anyone just arriving in the room or in Zoom, roomers and Zoomers, we're sitting on 2 blocks with a blanket under our shins in Jnana Mudra, breathing through our noses if possible, perhaps with some movement, noticing if there's any upadana, reaching out, any anticipation. And of course, anticipation and reaching out generate a sense of I, asmita. And of course, one is not expected to believe me or yoga texts or anything like that, but to ehi pasiko, as they say in Buddhism, see for yourself, here and now. Is there any anticipation in the body? Now, if you're not sure how to notice anticipation in the body, it normally comes in the form of one of the 3 Grrrrs. Is gripping, grasping, or grabbing. And it shows up in the breath and the body simultaneously. So if you feel any sort of uncertainty, any anticipation, any tightness, if the breath is in a pattern that is uncertain, and you know what your breath is like when it's uncertain. You know, if you go for a job interview or a first date or a family event sometimes, or if you have your photo taken, some people respond to these different things by being uncertain in the breath. The breath is sort of not sure. It's not committed to the moment. So we want to commit to the moment because the moment is our knowledge base. It's the only base of knowledge that there can ever be, considering that there are so many religions and philosophies and opinions and political standpoints, groups, in groups, out groups. It's very, very easy to get caught in. So therefore, all we really can safely and wisely deal with is this. And what this is not something you can contain with an idea, because the idea is pre-constructed, and then you try to squash this into that pre-constructed idea. Like, is it good? Is this good or is it bad? Is it infinite or is it finite? You know, and a million other questions. So relax. This is what you need to know, and this is what's here. And this is a confluence of codependence, co-originated, everything, you know, everything's together. So as you sit, you can feel the buttocks, your buttocks, if you want to call them yours, whether they're tense or not. And maybe movement might come to you. As I'm talking to you, I'm moving, or there is movement. And the movement is there to avoid me slipping into a mode of being somebody doing something. There's a great book called Being No One, Going Nowhere. Bless you. So any gripping, grasping, grabbing generates me, myself, and I to do it. And any generating of me, myself, and I is a limitation, a box that we try to squeeze ourselves into. But our true identity is uncontained. You probably, possibly don't know the artist Steve Hillage. But if you do, it means that at some point you would have been counted as a complete hippie. And he's got a song called Unidentified on his album Green, which is a really good album, in my hippie opinion. So that's, you know, I recommend you listen to that song, Unidentified by Steve Hillage. I am, we are, and we remain unidentified. Now, wiggle your fingers if you want, and you'll feel the nerves and the meningeal fascia that the nerves are housed in moving all the way up to the spine, all the way up to the brachial plexus. So that's around the base of the neck, the upper back. So sometimes you can be sensitive to that. If you're relaxed, if you're unidentified, blindness comes from limitation. Jnanam bandhaha. Interlace your fingers, stretch your arms diagonally, raise your arms. And as the arms come up, the tummy, about 3/4 of the way up, the tummy draws in and up, so that the action is not one of fulcruming the waist excessively forwards. It fulcrums forwards enough to restore our lumbar lordosis, our lumbar inward curve. But we essentially want the lumbar, yes, to lordosis, but also to lift. Bring the head in line as well. Notice the breath. Use love only. So use love only. And of course, love has the quality of ahimsa. I think most people know that word ahimsa. Sometimes you hear it pronounced as ahimsa, which is an ununderstandable mispronunciation. Okay, big wide circle with your arms. Back to Jnana Mudra and deep breath. In and out, and then more in and outing. So that just happens, doesn't it? It just happens. Who breathes? Who breathes? Well, the breath is a co-created, interdependent, natural phenomenon. It doesn't need a breather. I mean, you can breathe. But the breath doesn't tend to benefit from that. And often we do breathe, subconsciously, even our breath is being controlled by our views and opinions and our anxieties, rather than being a natural response to this. Okay, wiggle your fingers and change the cross of your legs when you're ready. Don't forget to put the blanket back in. Sukhasana has a gap, by the way, between the pelvis and the legs. Buttock flesh is drawn out and back. Jnana Mudra. The interesting thing to me, maybe to you too, about Jnana Mudra, the index finger, thumb tip touching, palms facing up, is that there are two obvious elements to it. One is the palms facing up. And to me, that feels receptive, open, receiving, like satellite telescope, radio telescope, like they have at Jodrell Bank, for example. I've been there a long time, they're very old ones. But the palms facing up is receiving. Can you feel that sense of receptivity? The palms are very sensitive, so it's easy to feel that. And then, of course, that's combined with that contact, which represents focus. So noticing receptivity. Noticing receptivity. So there's a part of our experience that always receives the experience, that's always conscious. If you come into relatively late Buddhism, it's not tantric yet, but it's not far off it, Yogacara Buddhism. And Yogacara is sometimes known as a Jnanavada, which can be translated as consciousness only, or it is consciousness. And of course, this is the philosophy that was then taken by the Shaivas and translated into what we might call non-dual Shaiva Tantra, just by spinning it a little bit more, expanding the philosophy and universalizing it a bit more still. So I hope that we are moving subtly and naturally, spontaneously. I hope that we're avoiding gripping, grasping, grabbing. I hope that we're noticing tendencies to lock it down in some way. That tendency to sort of, it creeps in, doesn't it? To sort of make a sort of a project of what am I doing? And that I hope we can sidestep. Anytime we feel that coming, we just sidestep. And if you sidestep it for long enough, the habit becomes less compulsive. So this is the theory of yoga, how to sidestep compulsive, conditioned behavior for long enough that you can break out of it enough to get some sort of perspective to inspire you further. That's yoga. It does it in lots of different ways. Wiggle the fingers. Hope you can feel it up through to the brachial plexus. We only feel if we're relaxed, right? And we're only relaxed when we're not taking our lives personally. Interlace your fingers, stretch your arms diagonally, breathe through the nose, raise the arms up when you're ready. An investigation. An investigation into clinging and its absence. So as you move, you're looking to have lightness, and what we might call agreement. So we're finding areas that disagree. In other words, areas that are not doing this, therefore must be doing that. What is that? It's the past or it's the future. or it's ideas about ourselves in the present. There's only three things that can pull us away from this. It's the past, what happened before, regrets, anxieties about the past, nostalgia. I wish I remember when, wasn't it lovely when? Nothing wrong with that. That's normal. It's going to happen. But we leave it alone. We recognize it with love. If you don't recognize it with love, then you'll get caught up in it. And the same for the future. Recognize when the mind goes, I wonder what will happen later. I'm really looking forward to, or I'm really dreading. And that happens, so you notice it with love. It's normal. It's normal to think about the future. But don't get caught in it. Love is big enough to not get caught. Doesn't get caught. Okay, big circle when you're ready. Rest the palms back in Jnana Mudra and deep breaths. Really deliberate, really natural, very powerful, deep breaths. Let them happen. Often the exhales are profoundly expressive, releasing tensions that we've built up over a long time sometimes. Tensions to do with the thought that we're supposed to be somebody. The idea that we're supposed to be somebody causes us such a lot of dukkha. Wiggle the fingers if you wanna. Wiggle if you wanna. And put your blanket with love and care gently to one side. And then bring yourself up to a standing position, which you can do with your feet together or apart, Tadasana. The super and wonderful Tadasana. So the feet can be together if comfortable. What might prohibit the feet being together is, if you're pregnant, don't have your feet together, have the feet apart, it gives more space. Or if your thighs touch before your feet, then it would be silly to push the feet together because you're going to make the legs bow out. Or if the feet are uncomfortable to touch. If your feet aren't together, make sure they're level, parallel. Imagine a straight line running through the middle of each one, and then spread your toes repeatedly. Now, every time I've ever heard any yoga teacher talk about spreading the feet, they like to spread them forwards, backwards, from the front to the back or from the back to the front. And they're always the yoga teachers I like and respect. So there must be something in it. But for me, it doesn't work. For me, it's lateral. So either way. So for me, it's across the width of my feet that I like to spread. And I do that by starting with the little toe spread as much as I can, and then lifting the big toe side of the feet and repeatedly lifting and landing them. And in this way, I pad the floor, not entirely dissimilarly to a cat padding your cushions, your nice new trousers or whatever. And they do that to arrive, and I do this to arrive. Luckily, I don't have claws. So whatever helps you to arrive, and of course, movement of your feet is movement of your legs. It goes right the way up the legs. You can't move your feet without moving the leg muscles. It's what moves them. And it goes right up to the buttocks and the back as well. And we're usurping gripping. So you can do that as long or as short as you like, or not at all, or any other way that's effective at negating gripping, grasping, grabbing. Now I'm going to encourage you to let your spine drift to its natural misalignment. So if there's any natural misalignment, for example, sometimes the spine wants to drift to one side. Don't stop it. Or sometimes it wants to drop to one side. Let yourself be really goofy. Right? So you really go to the extreme where the body wants to be if you weren't trying to make it proper and straight. And let it feel the full extent of any twisting or collapsing. And then if it's allowed to feel it before we come in and correct it, it will start to self-correct. If you don't jump the gun, if you're patient, it will start to self-correct. And that correction is coming from the nerves. It's not coming from thinking. So it takes a bit of courage to let your body really drift out of alignment, especially if you've done lots of yoga, you've read about Tadasana. But if you're patient and brave, And you don't let pressure get to you. Let the spine be as out of alignment as it wants to be, and open to it, and it will start to self-correct. And that self-correction is coming from the nerves. It's a correction from the substratum of the muscles, the nerves. Now let your arms raise as if balloons were inflating underneath your arms. And when you get about 3/4 of the way up, start turning your palms forwards and then up when it feels right. When you get a little further up towards the head, make sure your neck doesn't grip. So adjust your head position. And I like to move quite a lot of the body. So side to side can help the back muscles come in, or whatever kind of waving that comes. I've got a distant memory of going to a yoga class and somebody calling this the palm tree pose, which having just come back from Morocco, as a couple of you Zoomers also have done. Nice to see you, by the way. Palm trees are quite in the mind at the moment. But hopefully you've seen palm trees at some point in your life. There are even a few in Brighton, a couple on Queen's Road. I don't know who owns those houses, but they've got some nice palm trees. No doubt there are some in Hove, because houses are more expensive, the weather's better there. Breathing easy. So swaying around like a palm tree, looking for height, looking for lift, looking for yoga. When you're ready, press your feet and raise your fingers on the inhale. Press the feet, raise the fingers, inhale. Exhale, bend ankles, knees and hips. There may be cracking. Surprisingly, none in the room, but maybe at home. And then let it move. This is called Utkatasana or Utkata. Utkata means to squat. Now you can move your arms differently. You can turn the heels of the hands out. You can bend, extend. You can have one arm back, one arm forwards. There's literally, you can move them between backwards and forwards. A sort of bangles, walk like an Egyptian kind of move. If you like that song, you're breathing into it. Or if you're crushing on the lead singer, as I think was the rule at the time, then stand up, take a big circle, hands to the heart center, deep breaths. So really honest, deep breaths, profoundly deep breaths. Profoundly deep breath. Release your hands and turn towards the short end of your mat. So if you're in the room, turn towards the short end of your mat like that. At home, I don't know your setup exactly, but short end of the mat. And stand with your feet hip width apart, with your hands on your hips. Look down at your feet and imagine you're standing on parallel lines. Not, of course, the album by Blondie. That would be a travesty. But instead, literal parallel lines, like you're standing on a little railway track, and non-electrified, there's no danger of getting an electric shock, and there's no little trains due for hours, so you're perfectly safe to stand on, like the one in Brockwell Park, which I'm photographed of standing on, which I thought there were no trains ever ran, and I thought I was safe to do so, but Chris has seen with his own eyes little trains running on that very railway track, so I was at tremendous risk when I took that photograph for Instagram. Raise the arms up when you're ready, breathe through the nose. So again, movement often, helps, can help. Use it if it does. To avoid gripping, grasping, grabbing. Light tone of the tummy. Find the pelvic floor. You can do things like raise the heels, like one at a time. So you could drift to one side and raise the opposite heel. Or you could let the body turn left or right. Or you could bend or extend the knees. Even though I think, as Homo sapiens, we are conditioned deeply in our genes to do what the group does, to some extent. There's a Venn diagram, or there's a sort of, but to some extent. So that's why I try and list everything, because sometimes you have to hear it before you feel it's okay. But is everything? You can do anything if it's helpful. Inhale, stretch up from the inner groins, up. Exhale, keep the inner groins open and fold over the top of the front thighs, hinge from the hip joints, and bring your hands flat to the floor, which probably means bending the knees.
If you've got long arms, long torso, short legs, it might not mean bending the knees, but it probably does. You don't have to bend the knees, but the back, if your legs are straight, the back shouldn't be tense or tight. So again, some people find it useful to move their feet. I find it tremendously useful to move my feet because you're massaging the plantar fascia, but the plantar fascia is connected with the fascia, the myofascia, all the way up the legs. So as you move your feet, you're moving everything. Breathe easy. Padahastasana is an odd and marvelously so thing to do in the morning. Tread on your own hands, palms up. Not many people are doing this. Some people are at home listening to the radio. Some people are having a chat with their friends. Other people staring out of a window, eating crunchy nut cornflakes. But here we are, treading on our own hands in the morning. Odd, but good. Breathe into it. Again, the knees can be bent. Again, swaying can happen. It's tremendously good for the wrists and can help to resolve or even avoid problems with the carpal tunnel. So breath, 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 movement, movement, movement. Okay, I love Padahastasana, so I have to remember that not everyone does as much as I do, maybe. I hope you do. So we're going to come out of Padahastasana. We're going to come to Padangusthasana, that is to say, holding the big toes. Again, the knees can be bent and probably should be. The back needs to be passive, peaceful. The three things that we mustn't have in the back come under these categories: dullness, aching, or pain. If you feel dullness in the back or aching in the back or pain in the back, bend your knees or move your feet until that goes, or move your spine. But they are not sustainable sensations: dullness, aching, or pain. We've got to find ways for those to begin to release from the back. If your legs are hurting because they're working so much, just don't worry about that. Okay, release your hands from holding the big toes. Bend your knees a bit more until your ribs touch your thighs. So your ribs touch your thighs. And sometimes some people like a little bounce around, whatever's instinctive. I do. I quite like, or I don't know if I do, but something does. Raise the arms as if you're skiing very fast. And those of you who have been fiscally buoyant enough may even remember skiing and might want to add the little bumps. Okay. So, and the broken legs and the yearning for that thick, thick hot chocolate that they sell apparently on the slopes, or perhaps something stronger. Arms forwards and up with bent knees. Utkatasana, play into it, breathing, jaw soft. Stand up. When you're ready, take a big circle, hands on the hips, turn to the front. But before you do, make sure you've got a couple of blocks. Now, if you haven't got blocks and you're at home, you could use books. It's always good to have some big books in the house for two reasons. One is so people think you're clever. And the other is so you can use them as props. I recommend the Monier Williams English Sanskrit Dictionary. That's a big book. Hands on the hips. So you've got blocks ahead of you, and your hands are on your hips, and the feet face forwards, and the toes spread out. Now, a phenomenon that's quite usual but not desirable is to push on the common peroneal nerve and the peroneus longus muscle on the outer shin. Most people, I would say, partly because the little toes sneak under the other toes, collapse to the outer ankle. It's something we want to avoid, and we can avoid it in a couple of ways. One, by being relaxed and calm and not worrying about it. Number two, spread your toes with your toes up off the floor. So you lift the whole, do a wheelie with your foot, 1 foot at a time, and you balance between the inner and outer ankle. And it's an act of presence. You can't be checked out and do yoga at the same time, right? You just can't. It can't be done. You can't be thinking about the past or the future or ideas about yourself. And you can do it many, many times in your own way. It's about spreading laterally the plantar fascia, side to side, the tissue on the feet, and deepening the outer ankle and lifting the inner. And this process, if you're really honest, takes time. I haven't completed this process, but I've been working on it now for 33 years. So, it takes time. If you're impatient, if you're one of the people like me who's got very little patience actually generally in life, you must develop patience around this. So I could keep going with that. As I say, I've been on it for 33 years. I'm nowhere near complete, and I love the project. We're going to lift up from the inner groins through to the chest on the inhale. Inhaling, exhaling, folding, hinging from the hip joints, folding over the top of the front thighs. The thighs rise up, and you bring your hands to your blocks. Now, some people's hamstrings just keep releasing, and that's fine. If you come lower, you don't have to use the blocks if you don't want. But most of us, at least initially, need to come into this Prasrita Padottanasana Ekam, as it's known. Prasrita Padottanasana Ekam means spread out feet. Prasrita means spread out. Padottanasana, pada is foot. Ot is actually ut, which means intense. Tan is stretch. So spread out feet. Number one, so the number one is the position where you're open anteriorly in the spine. And that's our priority. Well, one of our two priorities. Two priorities, balancing and rebalancing the feet, which is tricky because most of us are addicted to our problems and anxieties, right? So when you're asked to balance your feet, it's difficult because you need all of your attention. But some of our attention is usually in running our anxiety, taken in running our anxieties. Movements such as movements of the toes, movements of the pelvis side to side, can be resourced together to balance and rebalance the relationship between inner and outer ankle. And a pose is complete. You only move to the next station of a pose. A stage of a pose is complete only when every single cell of your being is occupied with it. Only when every single cell of your being is engaged in the pose. That's a profound act of honesty. Profound act of honesty. So if the lumbar dips down, if the lower back concaves, good. If it keeps concaving, it may start to feel tight as the tissue between the top of the pelvis and the lower ribs gets squashed. If it alleviates that tightness to come lower, then that's the motivation for coming lower. And only that. That's the motivation, and only that. It's the only motivation. Coming out is done similarly to coming in. You come as high as you can on your blocks and fingers. You walk your feet towards each other a bit. You come higher on your fingers and then leave the blocks and lead with your chest. And come all the way up. Well done. Walk your feet towards each other. We're coming down to Adho Mukha Svanasana, the downward facing dog pose. So as soon as you're ready, you can come into that Adho Mukha Svanasana, the downward facing dog pose. Once you're down on your hands and knees, check by looking forwards, have a look at your hands and make sure they're equidistant from the sides of the mat. So have a look, make sure they're equidistant from the sides of the mat and from the front of the mat. And then your next check is to make sure the fingers are spread. And then we pad. Can you imagine that the molecules of your hands could merge a little deeper into the molecules of the mat? So, yearning for merging. This is samveganam. It's like the intense desire from freedom from this suffering that's driven by a sense of separate self. That is a convenient truth. We're not trying to get, we're not banning a sense of separate self, but we're realizing that it's a convention, a convenient convention rather than an ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is everything's everything. Shoulders forwards above the wrists, kumbhakasana, so also known as palankasana. Shoulder blades to buttocks, buttocks to heels. Perhaps there's movement. Again, it's very useful for the wrists. You're breathing through your nose. Now we're going to touch the floor with our knees so lightly that it will be quite annoying, right? So no weight at all, just contact, but not weight. Just contact. Toes are on the floor, the knees are touching, but you could get away with putting a weight there, but don't. Raise up one leg, keep the other one just contact. Bring that one down that you raised and raise the opposite. Raise both. Push back to Adho Mukha Svanasana. Down face dog. Draw deep breaths deep into yourself. Open up the armpits. Inner armpit, outer armpit. Open up the armpits. Inner armpit to the groins, outer armpit to the hips. Great. Coming back down to hands and knees. Catch your breath. Deep in, deep out. Take 2, 3, 4 or more. Bring your legs close together. Left close to right, right close to left. And then bring one leg forwards and all the way around the other. Right? Bring your legs as close together as possible and bring your feet as close together as possible by moving in any way that helps. So, for example, you could move your top leg in a sort of windscreen wiper blade. You could move backwards and forwards with the whole thing. We're trying to get our feet closer to each other, but holistically. And that's a proviso that we cannot skip out on, that our movement should be holistic. Now that takes, again, kshanti, patience, and satya, honesty. And those two things are a challenge to us only because of our attachment to our problems. Because we have a misguided sense, we all have this, that our problems define us, and without them, who are we? Could have problems, right? Problems can be physical problems, mental problems, societal problems. And of course, it's not that we're ignoring reality, but it's about attachment to those problems. If you get obsessive about it, then you can't see out of it. Like if you obsessively hate the government, and government isn't great, but that doesn't, you're over focused on that instead of making something better. So you got, obsession doesn't help. Now, while I'm talking, we can be beginning to settle backwards with the pose. So pushing backwards slowly, perhaps even walking the hands backwards, perhaps moving left and right. It's possible that one or two people might at some point get comfortable enough, if comfortable was not entirely the wrong word, to sit up tall. This is one of several versions or several poses that get the same name, Gomukhasana. Some people, if you end up sitting up, and you don't have to, but if you do, then you can bring your hands to prayer, or you could even take opposites. Whichever leg is on top, the opposite arm would raise up, and then you would take hold directly or indirectly via a belt or a sock or whatever you got. The hands together. So that's Gomukhasana. Breath is everything. Okay, slow and easy. Wherever you came to, release forwards. Don't rush unless you're desperate. And then come back to your hands and knees and wag your tail. Taking deep breaths, wag your tail. And then obviously the other leg similarly comes all the way around. And the feet come close to each other. But it doesn't have to be that way from the beginning. You can play with forwards, backwards movements. You could work on that part first if you want. And then you could add moving the feet together. Again, we're looking for holism, always. Holism meaning that nothing's being pushed out or left aside or kept apart from the practice. Huh? All the muscles, all the sinews. We don't override or oppress. We're not oppressors. Oppression starts in the body mind. And then take your time, if you want, to work your way backwards. Doesn't have to come far. It may be that you're used to it. You can put a block between the heels and buttocks as well. I should mention that. I should also mention, if you've not done this pose before, that it's normal for the calf muscle of the top leg to feel tivra, intense sensations. Right? And the more intense the calf muscle of the top leg is, the more you're someone who needs to do this pose. Right? That is, if you're someone who wants to nadi shodhana, cleanse the nerves. Again, hands and knees, hands in prayer. There's lots of variations, or the clasping. These are all options that you can take if you want. And remember, if you are clasping, it's the opposite arm to the top leg that goes up. Well done. Nice and easy. Release forwards and out. Oh, good Lord. Good morning, everyone. Now, we're going to come into Adho Mukha Svanasana, but with our hands together, thus, like this. With our hands together, thus. So down face dog with your hands like that. The feet can be apart, quite wide, and you can come up when you're ready. So come up when you're ready. Some people have said to me in the past, I can't get my head between my arms, and I want to. Don't forget your elbows bend. So it's part of the function of the body is that the elbows bend. Breathing through the nose. Good. And again, you can play with it. You can move left, you can move right. It's multifarious ways in which you can play. But send energy through the middle, having the arms, having the hands together, gives us more of a sense of the middle, the midline. And use any movement, like, movements of the knees, movements of the pelvis, that can be resourced to send energy through the middle. Calmly come out. Some people, as you start coming forwards, will want to turn their hands. Sometimes feels better for the wrists before you come all the way down. And then coming all the way down and laying on your back with a block under your head and a belt nearby, which I will find belts for anyone who hasn't got one. And just laying on your back. At home, if you haven't got a belt, of course you have got a belt, because you have got a dressing gown probably, and hopefully it's got a belt. Otherwise, I feel for your postman, the shock that they must get. So once you're laying on your back and if you haven't got a belt yet, I'm bringing them. I think everyone has here. At home, you can use a dressing gown belt, or you can use, if you're into martial arts, you can use your judo belt if you're into judo, for example. Other martial arts are available. So make sure there's room to the sides of you as well by extending your arms out, because we're going to use the space to the sides of us. And start with the leg that's closest to me, or at home you can do either leg, it doesn't matter. And place the belt at the front of the heel. That's where the heel and arches intersect. So the heel is the largest bone in the foot, the calcaneus bone. And you should feel some contact with the heel bone directly, and then the rest is with the beginnings of the arches of the feet. Movement might just come because we're yogis, we understand the experience we're looking to feel is one of flow everywhere, isn't it? So the leg can move medially or laterally, inwardly or outwardly. Neck is soft, eyes are soft, brain is soft, throat is soft. And then hold the strap with one hand only, the same hand as the raised leg. The other leg, we're going to flex up. That means lift up. Flexing means closing the angle of the joint. So that's hip flexion. And then we're going to extend that leg. And you can do it in any way you like. You can skim it like you skim a stone, or you can imagine you're pushing a furrow into wet sand. And as the leg extends through either one of those techniques, energy will draw up through the front of the leg as you extend, increasingly so, the back of the leg. To lengthen the groins, the lower end of the psoas and the upper end of the adductors. Really play with the heel and see if you can extend the heel, and it almost feels as if you sort of pull the floor back towards you a bit with the heel, and that can extend your inner groin. But be relaxed. Nothing's possible from gripping, grasping, grabbing. The 3 Grrrrs aren't useful. The 3 C's are useful. Calmness, conditions, connection. Understand? Calmness, conditions, connection. Now we're going to rest the spare hand on the top of the opposite thigh. You can rub or pat or just leave it there or move it laterally. We want to encourage the bone to release. And watch out for the 3 Grrrrs. And then we're going to pull our top leg towards us and out to its own side, which is why we needed the space. Take your time, visualize and feel a melting between the front hip points that's connected to the breath. Visualize and feel. a melting. That's connected to the breath, a melting that's connected to the breath. Bring your leg back up when you're ready. Take your time. And majestically swap hands as you come up. And continue over, letting the lower leg move with you. Stretch your opposite arm out. And draw in and up on the belly and lower back. Draw in and up with love, always with love. On the belly and the lower back. Don't hold the breath. Or rather, don't hold the breath out of uncertainty or anticipation. There's a certain way in which we hold our breath when we're not sure, or we shallow our breath when we're not sure. The interesting thing about that is, when we're not sure, it affects our breath and makes it shallow. But we can also release the uncertainty by releasing directly the breath. This is what the first text on Hatha Yoga tells us. That if you want to change your mind, change your breath. Okay, bring the leg back up. Nice and easy. The first text is called the Amrita Siddhi. Bend the lower leg and release the upper. Both feet on the floor. Let me hear a great big stonking breath. Yeah, like that. And let another one happen. Just let it out. Let it, just really let yourself release. I was reading about one of my all-time life heroes, Arjun Samedo, who I'm so happy that I got to see him 2 or 3 weeks ago in real life. Oh my Lord, what a blessing that was. And I was reading that when he first became a monk, I was reading this last night in bed, when he first became a monk, he didn't really know what to do, and he got designated to a little hut, little kuti as they're called, and he tried meditation practices and it didn't really work. And in the end, he just opened up to all his feelings, and he had 3 months of sort of anger and resentment all rising up. And then he said after that time, suddenly the whole kuti was filled with luminous light and everything around him became light. In other words, by letting things come up and process, they release. And he felt very, very luminous as a result of not having all that, all those curtains closed. Let's raise up the other leg. Let's call it leg 2. And breathe through the nose with the jaw soft. So remember, the belt goes around the front of the heel, and you can move your foot against the belt if you want, and breathe deep and free and honest. I'm on a one-man mission as an experiment to see if I can bring the H back into the word honest. Just seems like a terrible waste of ink otherwise. So, breathing easy, brain soft. Flex the hip of the lower leg and then extend that lower leg, either by skimming, which is touching, lifting, traveling, or by pushing a furrow into wet sand. That's what you're imagining you're doing, unless you're actually laying on wet sand. I suppose you could be. And then, if you were pushing a furrow, for example, into wet sand, as you push that furrow, the sand would build up underneath the heel and cause more and more resistance, which is more and more energy to rebound up the leg. To rebound up the leg. See if you can get extra length from the groin. Extra length from the groin. Perhaps you can do it the way I do it, which is to extend the heel, grip the floor with the back of the heel, and then push the ball of the foot forwards on the big toe side. It feels like I'm pulling the floor back towards me, And it feels like I'm pulling the groin, the lower end of the psoas, further down, giving it a stretch. Hold the strap with one hand only, the other hand goes on top of the other leg, and you can rub or pat, or you can move it to the side if that needs a little release. Breath, 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 breath. Sorry about that. Breath, 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 breath. Pull the leg towards you and then out to its own side, feeling between the front hip points, the anterior superior iliac spine, the inguinal ligament, which is between those two hip points, releases with the breath. With the breath. With the breath. So the physical release is a respiratory release, is a mental release. Bring the leg back up and swap in mid-air in, quite frankly, a beautiful aeronautical display of skill. And you continue over and stretch out the opposite arm. The lower leg can move with you. Suck in the tummy. Lift up the ribs. Look for length in the lower back muscles. Keep the breath expressive and honest and free. And to be heard as if Elvis was singing it, return to center. Way back. And bend the lower leg, release the upper leg, both feet on the floor. Let me hear you take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Sigh like exhales. Sigh like exhales. Eyes soft, jaw soft, brain soft. Extending the legs out, shoulder blades scooted under. Total release in Shavasana. We're going to have a really deep, really beautiful Shavasana, and it's going to last 184 seconds. So if something's relatively short, because, you know, this class, it's important, I always think it's important to be on time because, you know, we fit it in before work or school runs or whatever we do. If it's short, we want to get cut straight to the point, you know. So let it all release. Let the legs release. Let the arms release. Let the hands release. Let the fingers release. Let the ankles release. Let the soles of the feet release. Let the tips of the toes release. Let your chest release. Let the tummy release. Let the lower back release. Let the pelvis release. Let the jaw release. Let the cheeks release. Let the eyes release. Let the temples release. Let the forehead release. Let the back of the head release. Let the inside of the ears release. Let the space behind the eyeballs release. Let the occipital lobe of the brain release at the back. Let the temporal lobes of the brain release at the sides. Let the frontal lobe of the brain release at the front. Everything that can release, releases. Wiggle the fingers and toes, feel into the body as if it was something new. What is this? Stretching out intuitively. Rubbing the eyes or running a hand through the hair, stretching arms or legs. Finally bending the legs and placing the soles of the feet on the floor, scooting under the buttocks towards the heels and relaxing the lower back into a deep breath. Roll onto your side, facing away from the shrine. Your knees drawn up and tummy soft. Take your time to roll back towards the shrine when you're ready. When you're ready, come up slow and easy from the side and face towards the shrine with your hands in prayer position. And if you're feeling the vibe, man, then you can agree with the following phrase. So just listen to the phrase. I find it useful to visualize anybody suffering. So the other day, a very sad thing happened and I accidentally trod on, or I can't remember what I did, something, and I injured a centipede. And then after that, I visualized him in this thing. Or, you know, if you can think of anyone who's suffering in any way, or refugees, or someone at home, or anyone, or even a dog pining for its master at the supermarket, you know, it can be any level, then you can visualize them as you hear these words. May any merit gained in our acting in this way go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. Om. Thank you so much, everybody. May you be happy and well and free of mind-created suffering. Oh, thanks for coming. Good to see you. See you soon. Love you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.